So Stephen, a big first day of the 2022 New Zealand Economics Forum. We covered a lot of ground and had some fantastic speakers. What were your highlights from today, or some of them?
Well, there was many highlights, and actually it was a really big day and lots to think about. I think the Health Forum for me was a highlight. We were one speaker down, but we did find some real concerns about the health reforms, which something I think for everybody to chew on a bit, because they came from people who are across the different perspectives on the health sector, and some real ongoing challenges with the COVID response, which we've known about from the media, but we heard firsthand today. So that was one significant session that stood out for me. The business environment session also. We had three very different perspectives. We had the CTU, we had Business New Zealand in the form of the Sustainable Business Council, and of course Treasury as well. And we came away from that, I think, with a sense that there was lots more work to do around both the evaluation of policy options and the execution of policy that affects business. I think all three of our speakers, in their own way and in the way they described it, that was where they were all about. So those were two particular sessions, but you had a number of sessions that you moderated as well.
Yeah, I had a fantastic session with Helen Clark, lucky to have some time with her. So she's, of course, bringing a really unique perspective, not just as a former leader of New Zealand, former leader of the enormous United Nations Development Programme, but also having co-chaired the independent panel on pandemic preparedness and response, hearing her first-hand account of looking at that analysis of how the world responded in the early days of the pandemic and the missteps that we made back in January and February 2020. Really striking about all of the things that have followed from that and what we could have done differently. And I think concerning in that when she described what we might have to do differently, and consider this in the context of what's happening geopolitically. We'll hear more about that tomorrow, but every hour we're seeing more developments in the Ukraine. The ability of international organisations to coordinate. I admit, hearing her, it raised some questions about how well some of those institutions can act in times of crisis.
Well, and we're dealing with issues that cross borders, and as the world gets more integrated, these things require more international cooperation and coordination. Exactly. So whether it's a pandemic, whether it's climate change, all these things, that it's getting harder and harder. And I think she made the point of acting alone is more difficult in the modern world. So I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, completely. Closer to home, really enjoyed the session on the Māori economy. Some great insights there from Liz Tiamo. This is a huge sector, more than $60 billion in assets now. It's grown so fast. And looking at the future, there were some questions there about whether the term the Māori economy will even make sense in 10, 20, 50 years' time because of the integration of Aotearoa Inc., New Zealand Inc., but also strong encouragement for all businesses, all organisations in New Zealand to engage heavily with Te Ao Māori. I thought that was fantastic. I also really enjoyed the education sector. Listening to the questions coming through, there's a lot of concern about this generation of COVID kids, what's going to happen. There was, from the educationalists on the panel, the notion that we should just move everything online. Strong belief, and it's not backed by research, that's not going to work. Yeah. The importance of human connection is so fundamental to how we learn. And of course, it's the generations coming through now who are going to have to front and address a lot of the other issues that we're facing.
I don't think there's any doubt that the lack of social interaction has been damaging for many school-age kids at this point. The question is how damaging, and of course that's something we're going to find out the next year or two, and hopefully not too much. I just want to do a shout out too for Jim Bolger. Fantastic session at the end there, where he really challenged the whole forum in a couple of ways, actually. He challenged us to keep meeting, and I think he rightly identified that this forum provides a real opportunity to bring out new ideas, but then also challenge people to come up with more new ideas. And it's great to see somebody with Jim's history and politics to actually demand of today's thinkers to come up with more ideas and test more ideas. And really that's what we'll be looking to do tomorrow. With the remainder of the forum. We've got some big issues to address tomorrow.
Oh, huge. Now, you facilitated a session at the end around productivity,
Yes.
immigration, labour. Big themes around there that I guess they spanned a lot of our other topics, particularly around how the mechanics of government policy setting works. Interested in your views on that from a former practitioner?
Yeah, well, it's slightly worrying, and I think quite a few of our panellists today from both sides of the political spectrum were a bit concerned about some of the way in which policy is developed, and I don't think it's a criticism just of the current government. I think the previous government, which I was part of, would have to put our hands up and say, not all of it was perfect by any manner of means. And one of the great things about this country, in many ways, is we like to think of things and get things done, which can be a real advantage in some situations. But I think in policy making, it can be a real disadvantage because the unintended consequences of policy making that goes wrong can be quite far-reaching, and there seems to have been a lot done on the fly in the last couple of years, and perhaps not had even the normal level of scrutiny. And to be fair to the politicians, not the normal level of media scrutiny, because when you've got 24/7 COVID coverage, it's very hard to analyse policy and to really get the public debate going on individual policies besides COVID. And I worry that we may reap a bit of that over the next few years because we haven't had the sort of mental space as a country to really pull to bits some of these policy ideas.
I think it's an excellent point. Won't add the state of the media to a future forum because I think it influences everything else we're talking about. We started the day, of course, with Dr. Caroline McLeish from Treasury. Really interesting stats on our relative debt position compared to the 90s when some of the legislation we work with now, concepts of prudent debt and prudent investment were introduced. Some comfort there that we are in a much stronger fiscal position in terms of government debt and certainly the cost of servicing it with current interest rates. So I took some comfort out of that. That's you can read many headlines on any side of the political spectrum, but I thought that was positive to see and great to see Treasury highly engaged in the forum as well.
Yes, I think that's good this year. We've seen a greater engagement from Treasury, and I think long may that last. I think because you need the current policy analysts, policy developers interacting with the academics. That's the whole idea of this forum. So good to see.
Absolutely. Now tomorrow, a huge day. We are kicking off with Adrian Orr, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, followed interestingly by a panel of experts, New Zealand and international, on
Positive
monetary
friends,
policy.
I think is the term we're looking for.
That's right, the challenging friends.
Challenging friends, yes.
Challenging friends. So your take, and then on into fiscal policy, housing and globalisation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's any one of them is worth hours of discussion, but your take on tomorrow?
Oh, well, I think we'll bubble up some themes that have been talked about today. Inflation's come up a lot. The New Zealand workforce policies, the labour market has come up a lot. I think that'll come through again tomorrow. Housing's come up a lot, and inequality. So these are strong and emerging themes. Climate change sits there as well, and we had quite a lot of focus on that in the business environment session today. And I think if you look at it from a microeconomic perspective, it's quite clear that resource management, climate change, environment is a big, complex theme. And then there's the labour market, which is also a complex theme, including immigration. But then you've got the overlay of macroeconomic policy, particularly the settings of interest rates, what's happening with inflation, and how I think one of the things we'll be discussing tomorrow is that monetary policy needs friends. So notwithstanding Caroline McLeish's session today where she said debt was okay, the question that really does become is do you help out this very difficult landing that the Reserve Bank is trying to pull off, as is central banks around the world.
I think you're exactly right, and that metaphor, there's a lot of planes in the air in terms of policy reforms that have been kicked off. There's huge amounts going on structurally across the country, and a big theme I took out of today and interested in tomorrow is the rigour of the analysis, the rigour of the policy making, and taking that holistic view about how all these different moving pieces work, because we're going to have to land these things in sequence. They're all interrelated. We've heard all of the themes weaving together today. So a challenging time for the world, challenging time for policymakers, and an excellent time to bring together some leading thinkers to debate these issues. So thank you for your time today, Stephen.
problem at all.
Really enjoyed it, and looking forward to a big day too.